right, let's take a look at how we're going to measure our stone for our pouring up our dental models. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our bowl. Now, there are different types of bowls and they all weigh a little bit differently. So the first thing we need to do is use our scale to zero out the bowl. So we're going to put the bowl on the scale and then we're going to turn the dial so that the red needle matches up with the zero. There we go. And we're gonna take one of these little cups that's in the drawer of stone, and we're gonna take a scoop, and then we're going to slowly put it in, and we're looking to get 100 grams here. So we're just slowly shaking it out of the cup until we get right around 100. If it's 1 or 2 off, that's okay. We just are looking to get right around 100. So you'll do this for as many bowls of stone as you need. If you're doing a double pour method, you'll need 2 bowls of 100 grams. Okay, so I've got my setup here for pouring up my impressions, or at least the start of it. So you can see I've got my 2 bowls, each with 100 grams of gypsum. I've got 2 of these what we call blue plates or blue tiles. These are what our impressions are gonna dry on. I've got my newly taken impressions that are wrapped up and waiting. I've got 2 water measuring vials. These are different than the alginate vials. These ones are more of like a chemistry type. They've got all the milliliter numbers on them. So those are there. And then I've got 2 spatulas. And then I also have a new piece of equipment. This is a dental vibrator. This plugs in here on the counter. So you plug it in and then it has an on-off switch. The light turns on when it's on. I'll turn it on for you so you can see what it sounds like. And see, as I turn it up, it gets louder. And then when you turn it off, you want to hear the click and the light go off. We cover the vibrator with a plastic bag while we're working because the gypsum can be messy and we don't want it to get on the vibrator because it's really hard to get off. So we just cover the whole thing with the plastic bag before we get started. So now the last thing I need to do before I actually start mixing my material and filling my impressions is I need to get the water. So remember when we looked at the dental stone, the gypsum bucket, it told us that we needed 33 milliliters for the anatomical portion and that we needed about 25 to 27 milliliters for the base. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the water in these vials. So I'm gonna put 33 milliliters in one, then I'll probably put 27 in this one and we'll see what that looks like. Now that we have all of our supplies together, we're going to start pouring up the anatomical portion of the model. We're going to first pour the water into the gypsum, pour all the water in at once, and start by mixing gently to get all the powder and water incorporated. You don't want to go too vigorously at first because otherwise you'll get a lot of dust and powder flying through the air. Once you see that it's all together, you want to start mixing more vigorously because you want to break up any chunks in the gypsum and get a nice smooth mix. Once it's mixed, we're going to put it back onto the vibrator and turn the vibrator on. The goal of this is to get the material to come together and get some of the air bubbles out. So you can see some of the air bubbles that are coming to the surface there. Then we're going to get the anatomical portion. We're starting here with the maxillary, and we're going to take just a small amount of material and put it in the most distal aspect of the impression. And we're going to slowly allow the material, while pressing on the vibrator, to flow from tooth to tooth. It's very important that you allow the material to flow slowly so that you don't trap air bubbles into the teeth. Remember, the teeth are the most important part of our model, so we want to make sure we get those all. If you need to add more material, add it back to the original starting point. Don't add material in the spot you need it. Add it back to the original, most distal aspect, and then allow the material to continue to flow. Once we've filled all of the teeth, we're going to let it sit on the vibrator for just a few seconds to bring any last air bubbles up to the surface. And then we're going to start adding some larger pieces of material or larger dollops of material onto the top. And again, allow the vibrator to let those amounts of material to settle down so that we get any air bubbles out. Now what we're going to do is just put a little bit of extra material on the top to make it kind of flat. So you want to make sure that the impression is completely filled and flat. Now that I have the anatomical portion poured up, I'm going to go ahead and mix up the base and show you how to connect the two together. So I've got, again, my 100 grams of gypsum. This is my second bowl that I had measured out. And I have here my 26 to 27 milliliters of water. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that in. Start with gently mixing so I don't create a big dust cloud. And once I've got things coming together, I'm going to get a little more vigorous. Now this material is going to be significantly thicker than the first mixture, and that's okay. That's what you want. You want to work quickly and you want to get this really mixed together. So in order to do this, I have to put a lot of pressure on this batch because it has less water. See how it's just a lot thicker? It's like, you know, really thick mud here. So I am putting lots of pressure to try to incorporate the mixture. The more I mix it, the more it's going to come together into a good consistency. So just keep working with it. Okay, and then once it looks nice and mixed, this is what you should have, this really thick mixture. So what I'm going to do is take one of these blue tiles, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to place it on the tile. I'm going to use my hands kind of like I'm making like a little patty, like a little hamburger slider or like a meatball or something. And I'm making a little patty here. Now you can see that the size of this patty is a little bit smaller than the impression itself. That's good. So that's about what I'm going for. Just make a little round patty. And then I'm going to take the impression, and it's still wet. You can still see it's kind of glossy. So it's starting to dry, but it's definitely still moist. So I'm working quickly. I'm going to take this impression and I'm going to invert it on top of that patty, and I'm going to give it a jiggle. See, as I give it a jiggle and kind of vibrate it with my hands, it pushes the patty out and makes the patty bigger. Then I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to go around the sides, and I'm going to make sure that the base and the impression are connected together. So especially on the distal portion here, I want to bring that base up. You can use your fingers as well. And you're just bringing the two parts together. You want to make sure that as you're doing this process, that you're keeping the impression tray and the impression parallel to the tile or parallel to the table. If your impression tray is kind of inclined up, your impression is going to look quite weird when it's done. So you want to make sure that this is parallel to the table and that you get this base connected up well with your impression. You can see that the base has kind of squished out a little bit on the sides here. That's totally okay. But when you're working with this, you don't want to overwork this process of bringing the two together, because if you overwork it and you're playing with it a lot, what happens is all that movement and vibration tends to make your base really puddle out, and we call it the pancake base because it just gets really flat and wide. And what you're looking for is a nice tall base underneath your model. So this is what you're going for your end product. Now let's go ahead and pour up the mandibular. So same thing, I'm going to start by taking my water and pouring it all into the mix of gypsum. I'm going to start by incorporating the powder and water carefully so as not to make a mess. And then once I see that I've got most of the powder and water incorporated, I can start mixing a bit more vigorously. I'm looking to get a nice, smooth, and consistent mix. Once it looks like it's got a nice, good peanut butter type consistency, I'm going to go ahead and put it on the vibrator for a few seconds to bring some of those air bubbles up to the surface. Now, same thing as I did with the maxillary, I'm going to start by just putting a small amount of material in one of the most distal aspects of the tooth. And then I'm going to begin watching the material go slowly around. This is especially critical on those tiny mandibular anterior teeth because those are one of the most common places to get bubbles. So you really want to watch the material flow slowly into each tooth. Remember, if you add more material, you're adding it back to the original starting point, not to the area that you need it. Now with the mandibular, we're not going to fill the area where the tongue would be. So you'll notice as I fill it up, I'm making a horseshoe shape as opposed to filling in the palate or tongue area. And again, I'm making sure that the tray is completely filled all the way to the top. And I'm going around the edges to make sure that there's no material that's flowing over. All right, now that we've poured up the anatomical portion, we're gonna pour up the base. So I'm gonna use that smaller amount of water, pour that into my second bowl of gypsum. Start by incorporating the water in the powder. Once they start to come together, remember this mix for the base is gonna be a lot thicker. So it's gonna take a little bit more effort, a little bit more muscle to get it to come together. Notice how I'm kind of flipping it in the bowl. And again, this is just gonna help it come together into a smooth and good consistency for the base. This mixture for the base, we don't need to vibrate that at all because it's so thick that that's not gonna help us at all. Whoop. Try not to plop it on the table like I just did. Once it's ready, we're gonna get our second blue tile, and we're just gonna make a little patty or like a hamburger slider or a meatball, whatever you wanna call it. Then we're gonna take our impression and we're gonna go ahead and put that on top. We're gonna give it a little jiggle. Remember, we're trying to make sure that the tray of the impression stays parallel to the table. And then once we've kind of got that base wiggled down a little bit, we're gonna come in with our spatula and we're gonna bring all these edges together. Just make sure that the base and the impression are connected, especially around these distal portions back here. And that's where we really need to make sure they connect and that there's no gaps. Okay, so that's what we've got for our finished product. And then we're just gonna set that aside and give it some time to rest and set up. And this is gonna take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to set up. It depends on the temperature of the room, how long you've taken to work with it. There are many different factors, how much water is in the mix, different things will come into play. And I'll talk about how you know when it's ready to separate in our next video.